The RCMP have made 2 arrests in the case of Ratea Parsons. That's a 17-year-old Halifax girl who was taken off life support following a suicide attempt in April. Her family says she was bullied for months after a digital photo of her allegedly being sexually assaulted was passed around her school.
The arrests come less than 24 hours after a new law took effect in Nova Scotia. The Cyber Safety Act actually allows cyberbullying victims or the parents of victims to sue or seek a protection order from the courts. It also puts parents of cyberbullies on notice that they now can be held financially responsible for the actions of their children.
Joining us now in studio is Gary Durnfeld. He's our social worker. And Gary, the law is obviously groundbreaking in that it lays the foundation to pursue and to penalize cyberbullies, whether they're adults or they're kids, and it includes the parents of the kids. So what do you think of it?
I love it. Parents, take note. You can no longer slough off the behavior of your children as being independent of your parenting. So we may come after you if your kids are out of control. I have to imagine, though, that this law isn't going to be applied willy-nilly. It's not a witch hunt for bad parents. But it does put notice on the community of Nova Scotia that we are finally taking cyberbullying as a serious crime.
And one would assume that the courts, as this plays out, will take that law and probably put it in effect throughout the country. It in effect says that parents had better start monitoring their children, especially their online activities, because frankly, a lot of parents just don't know what's happening.
Oh, you are so right, Lawrence. You know, as social workers, we have been saying this ever since the internet and computers started showing up in people's homes. That parents, you must monitor your children's use of these devices. And now with these smartphones, these devices, they're ubiquitous. We put them in the hands of 10, 9, 8, 7-year-olds. And so even though they have these devices, they don't understand the problems that they can get into with them. So parents, we are still telling you, even, you know, we get it. The computer no longer sits in the kitchen. It's all over the place. It's on a tablet. It's in the bathroom. It's everywhere. But we can still have software on these devices to monitor our kids. We can still share with our children our views of what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. We can still have these dialogues. We can still set expectations. We can still hold our children accountable. You know, how many parents would wake up in the morning and say, yeah, go downtown and traipse along the streets at, you know, 6 in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, and we'll just let you go. That's the attitude when it comes to the internet. Parents have to wake up and realize that our kids don't necessarily have the smarts, don't necessarily have the judgment because they have the access. So we don't let them off at downtown and walk away. We don't give them these devices and walk away.
Kids, though, they really seem incapable of understanding consequences. So that's why we see this kind of behavior online, and certainly social media is in their blood. We can't have them not be involved in social media, or it's highly unlikely that's going to happen. So how do you get them to understand the severity of some of these things that we're hearing about?
Liz, you can't get them to understand the severity. That's why they're children. You know, when your 4-year-old looks up at you and says, I can touch the stove, Mommy, I won't get burned, we know that 4-year-old doesn't get it. They don't have the life experience on which to make that determination, on which to understand the consequence of a burn. And so too with our preteens, so too with most of our teens. They don't fully comprehend the consequence of some of their actions. That's why we monitor. That's why we have these discussions. That's why we have limits and expectations, to keep them safe from harm. Heck, you can't drive a car under the age of 16. Why? Because we don't think you have the judgment to handle the device independently. Same thing with these electronic devices.
But here's the conundrum in all this. As your child gets older, you want to give him or her freedom. You want to give them, you know, some responsibility. So how, as a parent, do you juggle your child's right and desire for privacy while still maintaining surveillance over their online activities?
Yeah, well, first of all, we take the word right out of this. This is not an issue of rights. This is an issue of responsibilities. Child has responsibility, parent has responsibility. And we as parents, even though kids are pushing us, and they should push us, they're pushing us for separation, individuation, as we call it in psychological terms, but nonetheless, we still have some parameters. It's not the Wild West where you get to go shoot them up wherever you want, however you want. Well, it didn't even happen back then either. So parents, I prefer you to struggle and err on the side of caution than seeing your kids at risk of making really poor judgments that will get them into trouble literally for the rest of their lives.
So really, I mean, does that mean at the end of each day you say, okay, fine, show me the cell phone, show me the iPad, I want to see the activity, don't delete anything, I want to know what's there. Is that what you do?
That is exactly what you do. That's exactly what I did parenting our now 29-year-old son. The rule was you're not allowed to delete the history, and I get to look at that history from time to time at my own discretion, whether you know it or whether you don't know it. And if I find that the history's been deleted, you're going to be off the device. Plain and simple. It's much the same thing. If you crash the car, you're not going to get to use it again. You know, so we have these responsibilities. And now with this new law in Nova Scotia, parents, we're going to be looking to you to take those responsibilities very, very seriously.
All right. Well, we hope all the parents were listening. I certainly was. Thanks so much for your time. That's Gary Dernfeld, a social worker, and thanks for joining us today, Gary.
Great
Thanks,
to be
Gary.
with you.